Hello and welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast. This week, the Motogp circus made its grand return from the summer break to sunny Silverstone. I'm Rhys, and joining me as usual to discuss the events of the weekend is Dill. Now, before we do head into the actual podcast, we just want to say that all our thoughts are currently with Gino Ria, who suffered an absolutely huge crash at the Suzuka 8-hour practice, and it was absolutely awful to hear that news. He's just not in a great way, so we really wish him a speedy recovery. Hopefully he is on the mend and he can try and bounce back from this. But just, it's not good to hear, just absolutely terrible. But just thought we'd say that before we do head into the podcast. Now, it's been quite a while since the last one. It's been a summer break. Have you enjoyed your summer? Have you enjoyed your 5 weeks off, Dill?
I thought I'd enjoy it more, but I actually, after about 2 weeks, we had F1, we had Superbikes, we had some PSPs, so there was some racing, but like at the end of the day, GP is the premier class for a reason. It's what you want. So it was a long 5 weeks. There was many kind of Wednesdays. So it was like, oh yeah, maybe there's GP this weekend, and then I realised, no, it's another 3 weeks away yet. And you're like, oh yeah, and then next week will come, like, oh yeah, maybe again this. Oh no, it's still 2 weeks. So I had a lot of hoping, but I'm glad it's back now. We've pretty chaotic schedule for the next 3 or 4 months till the end of the year.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of races to jam pack. 9 races to go in the season, of course. So there is quite a lot, but also quite a lot happened during that summer break. Of course, there was no races, but there were quite a few rider announcements. Probably the main two being Alex Marquez moving to the Gresini team for 2023, and then Alex Rins slotting into his place. The Gresini one definitely came as a surprise to me. I'm not sure about you. I definitely didn't expect to see Alex Marquez move there because it sounded like it was going to be Oliveira before the summer break. That sounded pretty shored up, but that wasn't the case at all. And obviously Rins to LCR, I think that had been known for quite a while that was probably going to happen. But yeah, the Alex Marquez one was definitely a surprise to me. What did you think about that?
I start with the Rins one. The Rins one was kind of like he's going to maybe get a Yamaha deal, but it was unlikely. And the LCR was kind of like, well, yeah, it was a good decision. It didn't come out of the blue. It was kind of, yeah, right move, decent team, decent rider. You'd hope that they can get a good package together. But the Alex Marquez, the Gresini one, was so unexpected that I had completely forgot about it. And about 10 minutes ago, I had to go through all the emotions of what? Alex Marquez is going to Gresini all again when we were getting the notes ready. I'd actually completely forgot about it because during today's races, Oliveira was being mentioned. And he's like, oh, he's on his way potentially to RNF. And I was thinking to myself, wasn't he in with the running of the Gresini seat? I wonder who's going there now, completely forgetting Alex Marquez altogether. Alex Marquez have a pretty forgetful season anyway. But I'm actually intrigued to see Alex Marquez. I'd love to see Mark Marquez on Ducati.
Yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it?
My brain went to a bit of a fantasy there of seeing one of the Marquezes on a red Ducati, but unfortunately I don't think that'll happen anymore. But Alex Marquez, he's a taller rider, bit like Luca Marini. Maybe he can get the most out of it. We'll see. I wish him well because he's had a torrid weekend and season, and he's never really got going. He had a couple of weekends while Mark was out injured in 2020 when he was on the Repsol, but his time in GP really hasn't been that great.
No, it has been pretty poor, and like you say, torrid weekend for all the Hondas. Really wasn't a good weekend for them. So those were obviously the main two things that happened. Well, the main two things that you'd expect would happen during a summer break, rider transfers. Now, there was one thing that was actually very unexpected and very, very poor, and that was obviously the whole Pecco Bagnaia drink driving situation. Of course, he basically had been out drinking and he tried to drive home and he crashed. And yeah, there seemed to be no punishment for it. I think obviously the Spanish police dealt with it in the way that they do, but other than that, there was not really any kind of punishment. The apology that he put up seemed a bit fake and was removed very shortly after. It was a poor situation, and I think a lot of people's respect for Pecco Bagnaia definitely dropped a lot after that. A lot of people's also didn't, judging by the online reaction, which was a bit scary, and what some people were saying, but a lot of people definitely losing respect for Pecco there.
Yeah, about a week later he was back doing Ducati PR, so that kind of says all you need to know. That it was all brushed under the carpet very swiftly by Ducati and all. Now, if it's kind of bad to say the best time of the year to happen during the season break. If that happened of a Thursday or a Friday and there was a race the following weekend, there would have been a lot more drama, but it kind of settled down when we came to the Thursday pre-race press conference. He was asked about it. He was asked some weird questions, some by Simon Patterson, that he kind of was a bit, didn't really have an answer for, and Jack Miller kind of defended him. He's made a mistake, he's admitted it, but going back to the apology, it was very PR typed up apology. It kind of mentioned that I'm not much of a drinker. I think he
clearly
said,
not the case.
Yeah, possibly. I don't think anyone in the VR46 Academy is not a frequent drinker of wine and whiskey and everything else under the sun. Valentino was a party man for many years, even though he was a top level sportsman. Different times. But going back to it, he was saying something like he drank like half a glass of wine, and that difference in road surfaces or something, a bit of a weird, again, very weird one. And he drifted off the road, but like there was a picture of some Seat on like 3 wheels in the air. I don't know what had happened, but the apology,
was like 4 times over the limit. Also.
Yeah, exactly, a bit more than half.
There was not just a glass of wine.
Yeah, so yeah, it's disappointing. You think in today's world you just don't see this in any sport, and it's a bit of a letdown from Pecco. But sure, look, everyone makes mistakes, I suppose. And thankfully, no one was injured. But
yeah, that's important.
It shouldn't really have happened in the first place. But we'll move on because it's not something really we want to talk that much about.
No. Yeah, it was just something, we felt need definitely to mention because it happened during the summer break. And then the most recent thing that happened literally on Thursday, I think it was Dovizioso announcing his retirement, but not just at the end of the season, was actually mid-season. So after Misano, Dovizioso will step back from his riding duties and will retire from MotoGP, with Cal Crutchlow stepping in for the rest of the season. So that's nice for me to see a Brit back in the top-class paddock. But it was rumoured for a while that he might be leaving. I remember around about Mugello, it sounded like he was going to leave there. And I think there was rumours that Jake Dixon was being linked to that seat for the rest of the season. It all got a bit silly. That obviously didn't happen. But now it does seem like that there was probably some elements of truth to that. I imagine they probably just didn't. He probably actually stayed because they couldn't get a replacement. I would have thought something like that potentially. So it does seem like now he obviously is leaving now. So it does seem like those rumours possibly were true at the time, but it's very, very strange. You think he would just do the last few races after. There's not many more. He probably just can't bother to go to the flyaways, I think.
Yeah,
what it seems like.
I reckon it definitely has something to do with flying. The flyaways, the Japanese, all them high humidity races, the jet lag, all that. I just reckon, especially he's in Italy. He just doesn't want to. He just
can just
like
drive
they're just dropping him off. Oh, just do one last race here, and you can make your own way home, kind of way. But on a serious note, I don't think he ever should have came back. Yeah, I don't think he should have came back. It was clear that he was never going to stay with Ducati as the 2020 season went on, but he's not a 22-year-old where you go, you take a year off, you ride superbikes every day of the week for 5 hours, and you come back and you're within FP2, you're back within the 1 or 2% off the top. He came back onto a bike that is absolutely nowhere. He said he just complained all year about the bike, which is valid because he is a very, very experienced rider, and his complaints were validated by Yamaha, confirming that a lot of their issues is what Dovizioso had complained about when he came back. But what a disgrace it's been for him since he came back. And now I'm fairly sure he tried his best and stuff, but he just can't get that bike to go any quicker, and it's just kind of tarnished. It would have been nice. I would have rather him just kind of head away, but I felt like he had bad taste in his mouth, kind of not being able to get a contract with Ducati, and then he kind of flirted with Aprilia and then ended up doing motocross the year, and I think he wanted another crack at it, but fairly soon after he came back he realised that he was fighting an uphill battle, and I completely agree that if he had his way he would have walked away at Mugello and he would have done one final Italian GP, but they couldn't get it. I don't think for Yamaha's reputation they wanted a test rider on a second bike for 14 races of a season. So I reckon you're spot on there, and the fact that Jake Dixon
Cal probably didn't want to do that either.
That's a full season pretty much, like, so for for a retired rider. A lot of the reasons riders retire these days is pretty much they're being dragged around the world every week. Hotels, flights, they're just constantly going. And he's a small daughter, Willow, so it is understandable that Cal probably didn't want to do a full season, as well as Jake Dixon being quick and not wanting to sacrifice his Moto2 career when it looks to just getting back to where he should be at. So it's not surprising that he doesn't want to do the rest of the year really with Yamaha. But it's a shame because he was never an alien, but he was a top rider. He was one of them he was nearly after making the kind of transition between a good rider and an alien, but he never quite had it there. But Brand Mark is close. That's why he'll be remembered for, and probably changing Ducati's fortunes.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it was a mistake for him to come back in the first place. But enough about the summer break. Let's talk about the weekend. We'll start off with Moto3. So I don't really have any notes about practice or qualifying. I don't think anything particularly happened aside from obviously Diogo Moreira getting his first ever pole position, and I believe that's the first ever pole position for a Brazilian in the lightweight class, or at the very least in Moto3. So it's a nice thing to see, a different nationality for once. I mean, it does tend to be the same, it tends to be the Europeans a lot of the time, and occasionally the sort of Japanese, but it was nice to see a Brazilian managing to put it up there. And I do quite like Moreira. We've spoke about him before in the podcast, how we think he's definitely someone to watch out for. So that was probably the standout event from the weekend, aside from the race. But initially, the race started off with a bit of a front group, kind of very Moto3-esque, very, very good to see, because it started off with a bit of a front group that were pulling away, but then it just became a massive train down to 16th, which, like in the good old days of Moto3, but once again, it was just mainly KTMs, and it was only really the Leopard bikes, so it was a good battle, but once again, the trends of the season showing. What did you think to the aggressive riding that we saw on track?
I remember watching it, obviously Moto3 being the first race of the day, and we got around halfway around the first lap. And I remember looking and going, gee, we're still on the first lap. There'd been so much action. There'd been like 7 or 8 passes for the lead, 3 wide every corner, people getting sat up, people diving to the inside. There was just so much drama, and the race was so long because every corner was a roller coaster. There was so much happening. And a fun fact, up until the race, no one had crashed in Moto3 all weekend, which is
really
absolutely insane. Gavin Emmett said it during commentary, which I was very unhappy, and same with Michael Laverty. Even Michael, who was probably one of the nicest people in the paddock, you could tell that he wasn't very happy that Gavin basically said that so far this weekend we've had no crashes in the Moto3, and he did jinx it, because we'll get to the end of the race and the last few laps were just a crash fest, and I just thought it was an absolute chaotic start that all weekend, in all the sessions, all the qualifying, that no Moto3 rider, who are the younger riders, they're expected to make mistakes, and they do a lot of time ride and do stupid things. They hadn't crashed, which I thought was just a crazy one. But back to the massive group, it was riders going from 1st to 15th, back to 10th to 2nd to 3rd, back to 7th to 11th. It was all over the place. You just had to wait for the race to come to people. You never knew who was going to win it. You couldn't put a winner on it, because you had Mino in 17th, you had Foggia in 2nd, you had John McPhee in 10th, and they all had equal chance of winning it, because it was just every corner. They'd come into Vale every lap, and there would be like 3 different groups of 4 wide, and like you'd be looking at you, and like because of the 2D of a camera, it's very hard to make out what was what, so you couldn't really tell who was passing who, and there was just chaos everywhere. It was a typical Moto3 race.
Yeah, it definitely was. Probably even more of a chaotic race than you'd usually get, because it was such a big pack. It's kind of like the type of thing we've seen at Mugello over the years, where they just all kept together, and that was just because they were just all being so aggressive with each other. It just kept them all together. Dennis Onchu, of course, in particular, was getting his elbows out, squeezing people out the way, dive bombing as usual. Usual suspect. It was some great racing, but it was a little bit hard to watch it a few times throughout the race, because there was people, because it's such a wide track at Silverstone, the lines are crossing over each other, and I thought, to be honest, I'm surprised the chaos kind of only started to unfold at the end. It was it was kind of clean, I guess, until towards the end, and I guess then that's when people start getting a little bit aggressive. But speaking of that chaos at the end, then Championship Contenders, it really went downhill for the Gas team in the space of about 2 minutes, I would say. Garcia and Guevara both sat at the back, well, not at the back of the group, but sort of in the middle of the group most of the race, just keeping out of trouble. Garcia actually started to make his way forward, but then unfortunately he just got absolutely wiped out by Sasaki in what was a very strange incident, because Sasaki was kind of just, he was quite far behind, but then he almost made no attempt to try and slow down or avoid Garcia. It's almost like he got target fixation, so he just ran straight into the back of Garcia. It was a really, really bizarre incident.
Yeah, with Sasaki, it was coming through the long left-hander as you come into a tight right, so there was a lot of momentum and speed. And I don't know if there was slightly before the braking zone, did he have a moment at the right in front, because it looks like he had to come off his line and he just broke so late. There was no way. I reckon he was trying to maybe find a gap, but like, so again, going back to the big group, there wasn't a gap anywhere, so he ended up absolutely clattering the back of Sergio Garcia's gas. Himself being flipped upside down, landed on his head, looked to be slightly unconscious for a split second afterwards, was lying pretty motionless in the gravel. Sergio Garcia was up absolutely fuming, as you would be as the championship leader, just been taken out. The Japanese rider was stretchered off and was told to be conscious at the time. We've still not wrote no reports of his condition, but he was somewhat conscious as he was being stretchered away with Garcia. Garcia, thankfully, no injuries, just his damaged ego and frustration towards the championship. But it was coming all weekend into them corners. They were all trying similar moves. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often, because it's one of those where you come from a very fast left, you're still braking while you're turning left, you change direction, it's easy for the bike to get unsettled as you transfer the weight, and you're coming into a right hairpin and you have to release the brake to go up the inside. It's such an easy place to make a mistake, and unfortunately Sasaki sent himself into orbit and will probably have some ice on his head for the next couple of days, because that looked like a pretty hard impact on his head.
Yeah, poor Sasaki. He always seems to have huge sort of accidents. He always seems to get hurt when it's a collision. Of course, obviously on this occasion it was his fault, but still it's so unlucky that he always seems to get so flicked so high and hurt quite a bit. But that incident there, probably Guevara was probably feeling pretty good after that one, because he'd just seen his championship rival go down. He was sat in a decent-ish position, and obviously they were right towards the end of the race, so he'd started to try and make some more positions up. He was going around the outside on the next lap of the whole pack, and then unfortunately, a bit of a different incident. Ortola just washed the front out on his own, and unfortunately, because Guevara was going around the outside of everybody, he just got completely collected. So one of those things that happens sometimes. That's the risk of going around the outside. Obviously, one of those things where all the incidents that happened in the race were put under investigation. I've not heard the results of any of them, to be honest. I don't know if you have. I doubt there'll be any kind of penalty for the Ortola one, to be honest, because he just crashed, and unfortunately for Guevara, he was on the outside. But yeah, unlucky for Guevara there, but not a great weekend for Gas, and another tide turning in the championship. It looked like Guevara was going to take big points and get a big lead, and all of a sudden, nil point for both. It was one of those crazy last couple of laps.
Just to contradict you on the Ortola incident, he actually had contact with one of the Red Bull bikes. Now, it's hard to see from the footage whether it was Onshore or Messiah, but one of them slightly adjusts their trajectory. He has to pick the bike up, and there looks to be the most softest contact between the back wheel of a KTM and the front wheel of Ortola, and that's what played a big part to his crash, and then end up taking Eisen Guevara with him. Also, Eisen Guevara, before he crashed, was after taking the lead at championship. So overall, you kind of feel for Garcia's sake, it was good that they both didn't score. It brings Foggia much back into it. Still don't think he can get anywhere near it. He's 49 points back now, so that's still too much. You're at the second half of the season. That's just under 2 race wins. You're going to need 2 more race wins while your opponents have the same look like this. It's probably not going to happen. I'm not going to say it won't, because it is Moto3 and they will prove me wrong. But yeah, it was a messy race towards the end. It was a shame to see all the championship leaders out, but as a course, it does bring the championship a bit closer, but just thankfully they're all unhurt for the most part. And I think, again, maybe Sasaki will cop a penalty for Austria. I don't think Ortola will, because of the fact that it was kind of a separate incident where he came off worse with the Red Bull bike, and then Guevara was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately. So I reckon there won't be any penalties there. There shouldn't, That doesn't mean there won't be, but I do expect Sasaki to probably get at least one long lap in Austria.
Yeah, I think that probably would be the correct thing, just one long lap, because I think that's probably fair. It's like sort of the last couple of laps. It's easily done, but it was a clumsy error from him. So long lap penalty. That's what Fabio got for. I mean, I guess Aleix didn't crash, but you can't really say. If Garcia had somehow stayed on, maybe you just expect a single long lap. So I don't know. Yeah, but I think probably one long lap penalty would be good. But after those two crashes, there was one more. Munoz unfortunately just crashed on his own right at the end of the race. A couple of corners ago. Do feel a little bit sorry for him there, but he is a rookie. He's going to make these kind of mistakes. But you did touch on the fact Foggia there did get brought slightly back into the championship. He's a bit too far behind, like you say, but finally back on the top step. First win since Indonesia, if I'm not mistaken, which is pretty incredible because we all expected Foggia to be dominating, winning every race. And to be honest, after the first few races of the season, definitely looked like that could be the case. He was super fast at Qatar before he got his back of the grid start or his long lap. I think he got both, actually. I think he got grid demotion and a long lap penalty, didn't he, in Qatar? Then obviously he dominated in Mandalika. He looked pretty good in Argentina as well. So it looked like Foggia was going to dominate. We didn't think it'd be all the way till after the second half of the season we'd see another win for Foggia. So I think that's down to the Honda as much as it is down to Foggia. I don't know what you think about that, but yeah, it was good to see Foggia on the podium, on the top step of the podium again, but I think it's a little bit too little, too late for Dennis this time.
Yeah, it's you're correct in kind of pointing towards the Honda, because if you think about it, the only 3 Hondas all year you could say that have consistently, I say consistently in air quotes there because one of 3 riders I'm going to mention was out of the top 20 today. The 2 Leopard Hondas are always thereabouts, but they're never the fastest. And then you have Mino, who shows up once every 3 weeks. And this was another race weekend. We were talking a while ago about the top 16, top 18, top 20. He was right at the back of that. And you'd have to think with the experience he has, surely the Honda is just lacking that bit. And the fact that we all expected Foggia to be so quick this year is he's still riding well. It's just he doesn't have the package. And that's probably maybe a bit down to it. Of course, he has made his own mistakes. He has crashed out of the lead at Mugello. He's crashed a couple of times this year. So you can't put up, if he brought these points home, maybe it could be 20 points home back now, 15 points. And you go, well, yeah, he's surely going about to win 1 or 2 of them another year. You could still see another crash for either of the other 2. But the fact he's has his own DNFs as well as the bike doesn't look to be there this year. 50 points, I don't see it still. I still, unfortunately, my gut feeling is Garcia. I'd like to see Guevara win it. I do think, though, Garcia, definitely in my opinion, has to be one of the gas bikes. I can't see anyone else getting near the 2 of them.
Yeah, I can't see anybody else either. It is going to be a close championship between Garcia and Guevara because they've been very evenly matched all season. But moving on to Moto2 now then, I think it's probably something worth noting is Jake Dixon getting his home podium. He actually stayed on this time, which is always good because we've seen in the high pressure scenarios, Jake Dixon, especially if he's had a poor start, he's a bit liable to throw out the scenery sometimes. He's done that a few times this season, but this time kept his cool, put on the podium. I think he probably is a little bit disappointed at heart that he didn't fight for the win because he had good pace all weekend, but he's got to be happy with the podium there, I'd say.
Yeah, and just before we touch on Dixon, we will go back to Friday morning, literally the first few laps. The other British rider in the class threw himself over the bar through Chapel as they come onto the Hangar Straight. Dislocated his collarbone, shoulder area, but also pulled ligaments and tendons out, so Sam Knowles will be out for at least 6 weeks. The doctor, he asked his doctor, there's a direct quote from his doctor. He said, if I came back after 4 weeks, could I ride? And he goes, you could, but I'll book you in the next day for your surgery because you'll do more damage than good. So definitely 6 to 7 weeks we won't see Sam, which means Aragon time is probably where we'll see him, which is quite a bit away. So unfortunate, he's not the first Brit to crash on a Friday on his home soil and destroy his shoulder area. Cal Crutcher did it in 2013, I believe, and he also missed the race. So unfortunately, Silverstone isn't always the best place for the Brits, but thankfully for Dixon, it was quick all weekend, had a small off in qualifying, but he was pretty good in the race. I'll give him that. I was a bit skeptical when he didn't have a great start, went back. I was kind of going, is he going to be able to come back now? He was behind Tony Arbolino at one point in P7, P8, that kind of area, and I was thinking now he's a lot of work to do. He's going to have to use a lot of tyre to get back there. So I am pleased for him. He did quite well this weekend, and well deserved, but I definitely feel he was slightly just disappointed that he didn't get a chance to go and try and get himself on the top step. I believe he thought he could, and he probably could, but I think his race start was just a bit that cost him really, and he did look to be as well one of the slower riders in a straight line, so it looked like Canet and Iagora especially could pass him a lot of times at the back end of the Hangar Straight. So more work to do yet if he wants to get his first race win in the class, but promising, and it'll be a nice moment for him to celebrate a podium in his own country.
It certainly will be, and there's also 2 podiums in a row for him, so definitely going to be building a little bit of confidence. And whilst we're talking about the British riders, I do want to give a shout out to Rory Skinner, the wild card for this weekend, usually in British Superbikes, but this time he was wildcarding with the American Racing Moto2 team, and what a weekend he had, really. He was on good pace right away. Of course, yes, he knows the circuit, so he didn't have to learn the circuit, but he doesn't know the bike. He hadn't done a single test session on it before, so first time he'd ever ridden the bike was on Friday morning, and to say that he was within, I think he was within 2 seconds of sort of the top time by qualifying.
1.8.
Yeah, exactly. What a performance. Beating his teammate, beating Sean Dillon Kelly on the same bike. I know Sean Dillon Kelly probably didn't know Silverstone, so that is a bit of a disadvantage because it's a tricky track to learn, but he was also in front of the likes of Simone Corsi, Niccolo Antonelli, people that have won Grand Prix in the past. So hats off to him, and honestly, I'd be very surprised if we don't see him in this paddock next year because people will have watched that. And of course, we do get to see him next weekend as well at the Red Bull Ring for another wild card. So once again, another chance to impress. I believe it is another circuit he knows from when he's done the Red Bull Rookies in the past. So hopefully able to go well there. And yeah, I think definitely going to be a good future for him in this category.
Yeah, Rory is such a highly rated rider, actually. He's been around the British Superbike paddock for a few years now. He's on his ZX10, which some argue isn't the best bike, and in his home race up in Scotland during the season he's done well, and he's been tipped for a while. Bradley Ray was the next big thing, coming to GP, coming to Moto2, and then he kind of went, I think maybe wrong bike, wrong seat, so it's kind of bad timing from in the class. And now Skinner's come along and he does look the real lead. He looked good on the bike, and to be that quick, again, you could say he knows the track, but he doesn't know the tyres, doesn't know the bike, doesn't know the electronics, coming from a 1000cc ZX10 down to a 765 triple. Completely a world different material and riding style, but he looked good on it. Had an off as well, but he was pushing his limits and overall did well in the race, and it was good to see him. I look forward to seeing him again in the future. I do believe he'll be replacing Sean Dillon Kelly next year. I don't believe Sean Dillon Kelly deserved a seat in the first spot. It was a bit of weird signing at the time. He wasn't one of the fast guys in Moto America. It was just a bit of a weird one overall, but he's had such a horrid season now. Again, he doesn't know the tracks, doesn't really know the bike that much, so you could put that down to another year for Sean Dillon Kelly. I'm sure he'd make improvements, but the fact that Rory Skinner's already quicker than him is a telling sign. So yeah, I'd expect to see the number 33 back on the grid next year.
Yeah, hopefully we will. I do feel a little bit bad for Sean Dillon Kelly because, like you say, of course, he is learning all the circuits, and hopefully he does get some opportunity maybe in a second year somewhere, even if it's not American racing, just to try and improve a little bit. But yeah, it doesn't look good for him having a random wildcard be quicker than him right away. But whilst speaking of impressive rookies, obviously Rory, we'll move on to Alonso Lopez. What a sort of turnaround to his whole career in the last few months. I mean, ever since he jumped into the Moto2 class to replace Fenati, again, under a bit of controversial circumstances that Speed Up dumped Fenati so early, I still believe that's probably slightly unfair, but you can't argue with them. They definitely made the correct decision in terms of bringing in a faster rider, because straight away, even from Le Mans, which was his first race, he was battling up in the top, I think he was in the top 5 in that race until he fell off. So he's been right up there the whole time. He's just always showed good pace. In Assen, he led for a good chunk of the race. And once again, here in Silverstone, led for a good chunk of the race. Just lost out on the last lap to Augusto Fernandez, a rider who is very experienced in the Moto2 class, especially on that Kalex bike he's on. He's been on that bike for years. So, Alonso Lopez going from losing his Moto3 seats at last minute before the season a couple of years ago to now fighting for a race victory in the Moto2 class, and it not being a weird race, it being a completely normal race where he had the pace. Got to say, what a ride from him, and what a nice guy as well in the Part Ferme interview as well. Really, really rooting for him. Hopefully he can continue this improvement in this good performance, because the Bosco Sciuro, a little bit of a dodgy bike from time to time, but he seems to be making it work lately.
Yeah, and the telling sign is that if we look back to the start of the season, we had Fermin Aldeguer, who was, everyone was banging the drum about him and how quick he was, and he did show promise, and he was outside the points today, and his teammate was leading the race for the most part, came through a few riders, got to the front, and if it wasn't for a very experienced rider in from Augusto Fernandez, he probably would have won that. He did pretty much everything right. I didn't expect the Red Bull rider to get it stopped in Brooklands. I was expecting him to get cut back into Luffield, but Fernandez just did enough to stay ahead into the final corner. And I felt a small bit disappointed for Lopez. I didn't manage to get the win after doing all the hard work. But it just shows why Augusto is probably the favourite for the championship, is that he was battling for P4, P5, and managed to pull himself out of that and catch the leader and pass him and get the win. It does show he has championship pedigree, but Lopez has a lot to learn yet, and I do see him being a top runner. Maybe in the future on a Kalex, I'd like to see him up against the likes of the regulars, and maybe he could be a future champion in the class.
Yeah, it definitely would be good to see him on a Kalex, to be honest, if he's doing this on a Bosco Sciuro, but I guess we'll have to see what happens in the coming seasons. But moving on to the championship contenders then. So we'll start off with Celestino Vietti. Didn't really... Another one of those weekends where he was kind of nowhere. I think this kind of is the beginning of the end for him now. After this race, it's been so many races where he's kind of been nowhere. He did also have a long lap penalty to contend with, which he had to take in an interesting position anyway. I think he was in about 10th place when he took it, so he wasn't doing well before that. The long lap penalty picked up really weird one. Practice starts. He pulled up in front of everybody else, which if you didn't know, you have to pull up behind, because when someone's in a practice start, obviously they're going to pull off. So if you stop right in front of them when a bike is trying to accelerate behind, of course, that's really dangerous. So he got a long lap penalty for that, and deservedly so. It is in the rules. But yeah, he seemingly was nowhere, had the long lap penalty, but then still sort of came home in the top 10. So scored some decent points, but again, just another weekend where he didn't show any pace.
Yeah, unfortunately for him, it is only his second year in the class. I think he just is lacking a bit of experience, a bit of race management, and just more like weekend experience. He doesn't seem to be able to put a whole weekend together. And then when we get to the race day, he's always slightly out of position, or he has a penalty or something. The penalty was stupid. It's just common sense. You don't pull up alongside him, then cut across 6 riders to go on the inside of the track to do your race start on nearly the grass. Very, very confusing when I saw that. I don't understand the logic. I don't understand what he's doing. It was just stupid, really, and it didn't do any favours for his race. I don't think he had pace to battle for the top 5, the Canets and all of them. I don't think he could get near that pace anyway. He finished about 3 or 4 seconds off of P5, a long way back from the podium. But we go to Misano soon. Maybe he might spark something there and have a good run in. But today's race winner, Augusto Fernandez, is putting a march on, and Iagora again being there just tells me that unless Vietti goes on a run of podiums and can start to beat these guys, or they start to have troubles, he's pretty much settling for third in this championship.
Yeah, he definitely does need to pull his socks up, like you say. Misano definitely could be a place. The VR46 guys basically live there, so they've got a lot of data there. They ride around there so much. They've got a groove worn into that circuit, so it probably will be a good track for him. Obviously, we saw he was fairly quick at Mugello as well, the other Italian circuit, so I definitely would expect to see him up there. But Augusto Fernandez really is starting to run away with this championship now. It's that 3 victories in a row, if I'm not mistaken. If you remember back to Sachsenring, what a dominant performance, won by 9 seconds. Assen won in a bit of a scrap at the end. I mean, he obviously sort of took the lead and pulled away a little bit. But today, won on the last lap scrap, sort of had to fight his way through the lead group a few times, and then obviously managed to bridge the gap to Alonso Lopez. Really starting to look, the real deal. It would have been interesting to see how Pedro Acosta got on. Obviously, the IO bike is really, really good. Pedro's still out, unfortunately, was declared unfit. Hopefully, he'll be back for the next race, but it would be interesting because Acosta was kind of also on a bit of a run of form just before he injured himself in training. So it would have been interesting to see how Acosta would have got on in these last few races, whether he would have potentially beat Fernandez. Of course, he's not going to be winning the championship this year, Pedro, but he could have still been fighting for those victories. But Augusto Fernandez now doesn't really seem anybody that could keep up with him. He just seems supposed to do whatever, which is a stark contrast to the start of the season. Remember when we were saying earlier on how he's on the IO bike, he should be doing better. He just doesn't seem to be coming together with him. He tops free practice, but then he qualifies nowhere, crashes in the race. Remember Mandalika had such a clumsy accident in turn one. But look at him now. No one would have thought this is where he was at now. Taking the lead in the championship by a decent-ish margin, because he obviously was the joint leader going in. He's got about 13 points over Iagora now, I believe. So, yeah, it's really starting to come together for Augusto Fernandez.
Yeah, and for a rider who had shown talent back into 2019 season, going on a bit of a run, winning a couple of races in a row, he just went quiet and looked like he lost a bit of form, a bit of confidence, didn't really have the bike underneath him, made a couple of switches between teams, and then once again he gets into the IO squad, and whatever Aki IO does, just makes winners. It has to be down to him. It can't be, in my opinion, the bike, because you see these riders come in. Remy Gardner, that's always been thereabout. Very similar, you could say it to Augusto, in the fact that he's quick, has potential, has had good results, has had silly mistakes, and goes missing for most of the year. Goes into the championship team like that, and surrounded probably by better mechanics, better data engineers, better analysts. Probably the bike is probably maybe set up a bit better. They have another better understanding of the bike, and now it's taking a bit longer for him to click. Whereas Remy Gardner was out of the box, a championship challenger, and led most of the championship. But I think this year with Vietti starting strong, getting shaky, Iagora being consistent but never the out race horse in the championship, he's had the time to kind of get his feet in that team, make a few mistakes like he did in Mandalika, and pull himself back. But we said 5 weeks ago after Aston, he's probably now the favourite because he looks like he has the most pace, he's the strongest in race form, and he just backed it up again today with that victory. Pretty good stuff from him, and I'd expect him to probably romp on and win this comfortably at this rate.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I think he probably will be the sort of bit of a runaway champion now. Still 9 races, so plenty of time for him to pull a gap and win it with a couple to spare. That's Moto2 then. Moving on to the main class, the main event, MotoGP. And we'll get started with Johann Zarco. Puts it on pole, showed good pace all weekend. Really looked like this was his chance to finally win a MotoGP race. 9 second positions, if I'm not mistaken. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. But unfortunately, like he's done in the past, a bottle from Zarco, losing the front into the Vale corner. A little bit wide, really just been a bit greedy, trying to still pull it down, and loses the front and crashes out of a lead once again.
I think you're being a bit generous to him by saying a little bit wide. He was absolutely nowhere near an apex. We saw the outside shot first from crash out. I wasn't surprised. I like him, but I don't rate him enough that I don't think he'll ever win a championship again. I'd like to see him in Superbikes. There's a couple of riders on the current GP grid that I don't think will do much in the class that I go, I'd like to see him on a Superbike. He's probably my main candidate. I'd love to see him on a V4 in Superbikes. I think he could do something special there. But back to today, he was brilliant over the one lap. Crashed twice already this weekend, so I knew he was at his limit. Stuck it on pole, all-time record lap time. He looked phenomenal. And in the race, he started quick. He looked to be pushing on a bit and was a metre off an apex, was in hot. In a race situation, he's surely a 2-time championship, should have better race management to know that I'm in a bit hot here. I'm going to take a 210 drop in this corner. I'm going to pick it up, square it off, and just keep my lead. But he was being put under pressure from fellow Ducati rider Jack Miller behind. But unfortunately, another opportunity slipped through his fingers. He won't get many more of these with the caliber of rider on the calendar these days. So maybe that was his last chance. We don't know. Next weekend, or 2 weeks' time, we go to the Red Bull Ring, another great track for Ducati. He might be able to do something there, but then you have to beat the likes of Pecco, Jack, his teammate, Bastianini. So there's a lot of riders there, and that's not even to mention the Aprilias or any other manufacturer. So golden opportunities in GP don't come along often. He's had many opportunities to win, and a lot of time he does end up in the gravel. So it's a bit of a theme. I wasn't surprised when he crashed, but it's a shame again that he has thrown away another good chance at a victory.
Yeah, it really is a shame for him, Zarco. Just once again, like you say, there are some really fast up-and-comers, especially on those Ducatis. We've got Bastianini, Martin, both up there in the race, obviously, today. And they both look set to have factory equipment underneath them for the next season, one team or the other either way. So, yeah, this could be really Zarco's last chance. We'll have to see. He does tend to perform well at some circuits, like you say, Red Bull Ring coming up next, that's Ducati Central, so potentially he could do, but another opportunity slips through his fingers. But from one Frenchman struggling to another, Fabio Quartararo, he looked good all weekend. He had virtually worn a groove through that long lap. Obviously, he knew coming into the weekend that he was going to have one, basically taking it whenever his lap wasn't very good, whenever there was a yellow flag that ruined his lap, which is the correct thing to do. Practice it, put a bit of rubber down in it, you may as well. And he pretty much optimized that to lose like a second and a half, roughly, when it's supposed to be like basically a 3-second penalty. So he did a good job with that one. His start was pretty decent. He'd gone from the second row up into second place, was trailing Zarco. Obviously had to do his long lap. But then the race never really ticked on from there. It just seemed like the usual Yamaha situation. You get sandwiched between a few Ducatis and that's your race over. Kind of what's been happening to Morbidelli, Dovizioso and Binder all season because they start further back. Obviously, you just don't see it, but that's the kind of race they've had, kind of races we've seen from Vinales and Valentino Rossi in the past on the Yamahas, and even Fabio himself in previous seasons. So, yeah, just one of those races. I think his tyre choice probably was the wrong one, ultimately as well. I believe it was on the soft-medium combination, which probably would have worked if he'd taken the lead on the first lap. But because he didn't, then it was just going to overheat the typical Michelin tyre problem. So, yeah, Fabio, after that long lap, he just didn't really work for him.
No, unfortunately, I reckon he gambled on tyres knowing that he'd have to have maybe a second in hand going onto them straights, not be caught and pass. So it was a good start from him. He always had the penalty, and I reckon maybe if he got to the lead, he could have pulled big enough a gap that he might have been able to do like a semi-qualifying stint of like 3 quick laps just to break it, lose the second then, and maybe fall back in somewhere on the podium. But just got ahead of Maverick Vinales on the Aprilia after his penalty. His race in there was kind of ruined. He was behind fast bikes in front of him, and typical Yamaha story, doesn't have the power to overtake, got stuck on a train, and that was his race done. He barely beat Aleix Espargaro in the end to at a very, very wishful attempt at passing him into Brooklands. But overall, he can't really be too unhappy. He did his best as always, and again, just beat Aleix, who's his closest rival. And Pecco is still a long way back, so it's not really time yet to panic. But next race weekend won't be much better either, I don't reckon, in Spielberg.
Yeah, it's probably worth noting that he did, of course, beat Aleix Espargaro. Might as well move on to him, to be honest. Obviously, a huge crash in FP4 for Aleix. Sort of limped away from it, had to be helped away, helped to the medical centre, then helped back to the garage. Still got back on the bike then for qualifying, put it 6th place on the grid. At the time, set pole position, so that was pretty unbelievable. And all the pain he was in, and just hanging in there in the race as well, not fading too much. Towards the end, he did a little bit. Also, like you say, that dive bomb on Fabio on the final lap, so far back, but the willingness to go for it and the ability to not crash doing so and still somewhat pull it down. Obviously, he didn't make the pass, but he didn't run completely off the track or anything. So, you know what a weekend it was from Aleix, because he was battered and bruised, but he really grit his teeth and put it together.
Yeah, he really... Unfortunately, he probably would have been the race winner if it wasn't for his crash in FP4. He was tipped all weekend to be the quickest, and everyone was going back to his podium last year and how the Aprilia really worked well there. And he was quick. I wouldn't have put him past him to be at least on the front row in qualifying. And the fact that the lap time he did in qualifying was still sensational, considering he could barely walk to the bike. He actually was stretched away from the incident at first, but he insisted to walk. And it was a bit of a weird one. He basically crawled into the medical centre and then kind of limped back out, looking a lot better. And he did morning warm-up, and they said he was fit, but it would be a long race. And you could see in the early few laps he did labour a small bit, dropped away. But I'd say as the race went on, he got a bit more, I think maybe loosened up the legs a bit more, got a bit more flowy, and did the best he could. It's a shame really, because if you were looking at his results, or I was looking at his results today before the race started, he had a run of 4 podiums in a row. Then he had Catalunya, where he was on for a podium and threw it away with a mistake in the lap counter. Then we had Aston, where he probably would have won if it wasn't for Fabio. And then today he could have won. So imagine the run of races he could have went on if it wasn't for some bad luck and some silly mistakes. But again, phenomenal round from him. Just the performance with the injuries was amazing. And once again, Aprilia can hold their head up and just be proud of their rider for putting on such a warrior effort.
Yeah, they certainly can. Aprilia should be proud in general, because, a great race for the other Aprilia, Maverick Vinales. It does seem like he's finally sort of got to grips with that bike. He had a good weekend back in Sachsenring, where he was fighting for the podium until, unfortunately, his ride-out device or his rear suspension kind of failed. He had to retire. He got the podium in Assen. You could argue it was a little bit lucky because of the Fabio incident and the Elation incident. But today, no luck at all needed for Maverick Vinales. Looked amazing all weekend, really. Put it on the front row. Finally qualified up there on the Aprilia. That's been his Achilles heel. He made a bit of a poor start, but again, that was a ride height device issue, it seemed. He didn't use the ride height device off the line, and then also had a little bit of contact with Fabio, so he had to roll out the throttle. So unfortunately, he probably would have actually made a good start if that hadn't have happened, but he made a bit of a poor start. But then he got overtaken, but he fought back. He didn't just drop back like he's done in the past. So 2 of his biggest Achilles heels, really, have been the starts and the qualifying. He kind of solved both to some extent today, and he bared the fruit of that. He then, in the race, had his awesome late race pace, like he always does. He came from 4th place, basically to actually lead for a very short amount of time. So what a weekend it was for Vinales. I still can't believe that gap he caught up to Bagnaia. He passed Miller, 0.6 to Bagnaia. I thought, well, maybe if he does 2 perfect laps, he'll be on the back of Bagnaia. He caught him in half a lap and dived in at the inside. So it was really unfortunate for him to lose out in the end. I really wanted that Aprilia victory. I wanted to see Vinales sort of back on the top step as well. It would have been nice to see. Obviously, just ran a little bit wide going underneath Pecco and then made a couple of mistakes on the last lap trying to close back up. But what a race it was from Maverick Vinales. Well, what a weekend from Vinales even.
Yeah, I was massively pleased again to see him on the podium. I think the one mistake really, like you could say the race start, but I think that was more of a mechanical issue. The one mistake I believe he made was when he closed that 0.6 of a gap in half a lap, he instantly went for the move on Pecco, even though he was just a bit too far back in my opinion, because you see he takes so much entry speed in. When he hits the apex, he's going faster than he has most laps, so the trajectory is slightly more wide, which means he doesn't have the exit speed, where the Ducati squares him off and gets him, and then he, on the last lap, is riding the wheels off, and you can just see he just used up his tyre a bit too much, can't make the distance, and it's a P2. I reckon if he just gets to Pecco, doesn't go for it where he did, and maybe just sit on him for the rest of the lap, maybe try it into Vale, or again try it in the same corner the last lap, it would be probably, mightn't have guaranteed victory, but it was probably a better chance, because as soon as Pecco saw him come to the inside, that was it. Pecco got his head back on, screwed it away, and just kind of put in a good enough lap, went defensive where he had there, broke as late as he could, and that was really Maverick's chance gone. But again, race pace towards the end of the race, he's absolutely ridiculously quick, and the fact again that he went backwards, didn't have the good start, then fought back. There was points where I was watching him and I was like, he just isn't the late breaker that he needs to be. He gets out of the corners well. The Aprilia clearly is quick in a straight line, but couldn't put a pass on Fabio for many, many laps. And maybe if he was just able to get motoring maybe 2 or 3 laps earlier, he could have got to Pecco with 5 laps left. It could have been a different story, but nonetheless, 2 podiums in a row. The race win, in my opinion, is coming. He's clearly quick enough, and he's gelling well now with the RSV GP bike. it's good to see. I'm happy for him.
Yeah, it is, because it's interesting as well, because a year ago he wasn't at this race, been fired from Yamaha for the weird operation of the motorcycle, I believe is what they said, wasn't it? The
Revgate.
Yeah, Revgate, obviously the whole issue with trying to blow up the engine at Austria. So it's good to see sort of a year on, sort of the stories come from full circle, and he almost could have won today. That would have been the fairy tale, but I tell you what, he still seemed happy with second place. He knew he had the pace to win that one. He just got a bit unlucky. I think Martin repassing him at one point really did him over as well. Cost him probably a lap or two's worth of progress when Martin did that. So, yeah, Vinales definitely going to take some confidence from that one. But the winner today, Pekka Bagnaia, I guess kind of putting his season back on track a little bit, bouncing back from, well, it's a two in a row now, so he's bounced back from some of the poor form, but I think he's still too far behind in the championship to be a factor. But of course, Fabio and Aleix do continue to have poor weekends like this. It obviously is still mathematically possible, so I guess we technically can't count him out, especially with some good Ducati circuits coming up, such as the Red Bull Ring. So another good race for Pecco. Took the lead fairly early on, sort of had his wingman, Jack Miller, behind him. Another just pretty much flawless victory. He didn't make any mistakes, to be fair, like usual. I mean, he either makes no mistakes or loads of mistakes, but when he's not under pressure, he doesn't really make any mistakes, and that was shown again today. He was never under any pressure, because the only time anyone got near him was Vinales, and Vinales was up his inside before he knew that he was there. So, yeah, Pecco, pretty much flawless victory there, and just another one to add to the trophy cabinet for him.
Yeah, and the key to Pecco's championship push last year was the second half of the season. He went on a run where he was just quicker than Fabio, was beating him to pole positions, was beating him in the race. So it could be a carbon copy of last year. This year is that he'll probably beat him to the end of the year, but not beat him overall just because of his poor start. I do expect him to beat him in Aragon, probably Misano, the likes of the flyaways. A lot of them are kind of power tracks, as well as Austria in 2 weeks' time. I just see the Ducati working better at them tracks than the Yamaha, not really using the rider as the definite answer. It'll be more that they'll come out to the machinery. So it'll be a big indication of how the season will go after, in this next podcast when we are doing the Austria one, how well Pecco does there, how well Aleix has done there, and also how bad or how much damage limitation Fabio has done. So for me, Fabio just needs to start taking podiums now. I think he's done enough with the race wins to get himself ahead, but from here on now, he's had a poor Assen, poor Silverstone. Because of the Assen, we could say, you could probably argue that he probably could have got a podium today if it wasn't for the penalty, putting him back behind Ducatis of Miller and all the other kind of likes of that. So one small mistake and he's lost 2 weekends to it. He's lost points to his main championship rivals. What is to being said that next weekend he doesn't crash trying to pass a Honda and P7. It can happen, these things. It can go on a bit of a roll. He can get in his own head. So he needs a good performance next time out. But Pecco, pretty surprising really he won that race, because he didn't seem to have the pace all weekend. It was a bit of a weird one. He's P20 in FP4, which is usually your race runs. So it was an interesting one. And he did everything he had to. He got to the front, had that bit of pace over Miller. Miller used a soft front. He said that towards the last 6-7 laps was just not really working for him. And of course, like we said with Maverick, he caught him but didn't have enough time to actually really sit there and plan a move. Just had to go for it. And unfortunately for Maverick, he couldn't do it, but Pecco was smart enough to just hold on for one lap. And I still don't see him pulling it back in the championship. I reckon it could be less than the race win when we're at the end of the year, and we could look back at the likes of Sachsenring, where he threw it probably a guaranteed 20 points, bad start in Qatar, and all the other little incidents we've had over the year, the Le Mans, where a really, really silly move or silly mistake when under pressure. So all these little mistakes add up, and that probably will catch Pecco again this year. It'll be interesting next year. Will he be able to start strong and match Fabio from the start? But I reckon Fabio still has this year, but it won't be as easy as it has been for the first half of the year.
Yeah, I think it probably will be a bit of momentum building now for Bagnaia. But speaking of the future races, then
prediction time for the next race. Obviously, the Red Bull Ring, the Austrian Grand Prix. Now, in the past, to be honest, Fabio has gone fairly well there, considering it's a track the Yamaha doesn't go too well at. 2019, he was right up there. I think he was third place. I remember last year. I think last year was that amazing pass where he outbraked like 3 riders around the outside, something like that. It was unbelievable. So, he's got the pace. We've got the new layout at Austria as well, so that could definitely play into it. Also, the chicane, that probably will help the inline fours out a little bit there. So we'll have to see. So maybe it won't quite be as Ducati dominated, but I bet it will be. And with all the competitive Ducatis, I could see a real, there could be like a top 5 lockout of Ducatis, because you've got some good riders on the Ducatis. The Ducati's working well, both the GP21 and 22 clearly working well now. So yeah, it could be good. But what do you think is going to happen in the Austrian Grand Prix?
I reckon, even with the track layout, I don't think it makes it any better for Yamaha. I reckon it's still a stop-start section, because it's a very square and triangular section where you've 90 degree, and 2 little drag races where they'll still get eaten up. Now, they mightn't get as badly destroyed as they would if it was a dead straight where they hit 5th gear and the Ducati already passes them. But you still need to think out of the last corner to turn 1, they're going to lose that battle. They're going to lose from turn 1 to turn 2, 3 to 4. Then you have 4 to 5. They're going to lose all that. And then you've, I think, another 4 corners on the track. So it's not a massive track for the inline fours to make up their time. They're going to be losing time everywhere. If I had to put my money on someone, Jorge Martin. I reckon he's won there before. He's small, he's light. I reckon he'll take points off everyone next weekend. I don't see Fabio being in top 5. Likes of Jack Miller, Fabio, Pecco. So you have your 2 factory. I don't know if the Aprilia is quick enough to do it there. I know they're not as slow as the Yamaha and they're not as quick as Ducati. They might be able to do something. Maybe more Leish than Maverick. But it'll be a Ducati route. Not really sure about Zarco. Maybe Bastianini, but Bastianini seems to only wake up when there's like 7 laps left in a race weekend, and that's where he comes good. So it'll be an interesting one, but it'll be a bit of a train race again. But I reckon the Yamahas will be absolutely destroyed again.
Well, there you go then. Some bold predictions there. Martin obviously did win it last year, so he could be very, very fast. But that pretty much brings this episode to a close. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. If you are watching on YouTube, do like the video. If you are listening on Spotify, do rate the podcast 5 stars, because it really does help. But I've been Rhys. He's been Dill. We'll see you in the next episode.